Part 1. The Two Mountains. 1. Moral Ecologies. I worked with Jim Lair for 10 years. Lair created a moral ecology in the workplace with his nonverbal communication. We all create microcultures and leave moral ecology legacies. Greeks, Romans left us an honor code, Parisians the Bohemian, and Victorians morality. Institutional responses to mid-20th century problems are emphasized duty, unity, and authority. Society was stable. People did their duty with less labor rights and rampant prejudices. Generations of families sold their labor to the same largest corporations in the world. Density and inconvenience made social life inescapable for all but determined loners. You shopped locally and worshipped at churches, which later settled molestation cases. Bosses, machines, and machines and quid pro quo strangled democracy, but people did their duty. Many people today wish to return to this ethos because it provided identity. That virtuous moral ecology kept self-love in check through social shaming. Chauvinism, conformity, torturous intolerance, and boring food were obvious failings. John Steinbeck described this numb, joyless life stopping in a Chicago hotel. He deduced some details about the previous room's guest. The man had likely been married, but took an escort. Steinbeck blamed soulless organizations for the man's lost capacity to feel. The era's commentary claimed status seekers were losing their authentic selves. Though usually rational, moral evolution after post-war conformity was kind of bumpy. In 1848, 1917, 1968, and today, moral ecologies waged brutal wars to solve social problems. When cultural changes, average behavior changes. Moral activists and cultural pioneers change society, not politicians. I consider myself a spiritual hero in the model of Joseph Campbell. 1960s counterculture opposed middle-class materialism, only to become co-opted. Rejecting authority, youth and travel were celebrated, with individualism replacing duty. The same year Steinbeck analyzed hotels, some students wrote an idealistic manifesto. They desired a personal authenticity beyond egoism and towards independence. Centuries-old romantic counterculture, expressive individualism became mainstream. Economic and individualistic emancipation narratives displaced previous social unity. A teacher who married a 17-year-old student described selfism masterfully, among others. I want to clarify that freedom is good, intolerance bad, and cultural revolution necessary. But extremism corrupts, and absolute freedom alienates through hyper-individualism. This moral ecology assumes fundamental individual autonomy, or no harm, no foul. Ultimate authority is inside rather than the corrupt society without. Further assumptions. This moral ecology assumes fundamental individual autonomy, or no harm, no foul. It assumes that ultimate authority is inside, rather than the corrupt society without. Further assumptions are privatizing meaning, the right to define one's existence. This opposes shared moral order, leading to moral relativism. Then there's the dream of total freedom, cannibalizing family heritage, faith, and nation. Selfishness trumps kindness because people don't submerge themselves, conform. Focuses on consumption, health, and technology make it harder to live communally. Colonial Americans voting with their feet to abandon Western civilization haunts me. They preferred the communal native culture to individualistic, misordered Europeans. Morality, love, connection are difficult in two free societies, especially for young adults. 2. The Instagram life. Religious festivals, military parades, and commencements transmit social values to kids. It is hypocritical for successful people to describe failure as necessary. The dominant values of our age are turning out to be big boxes of nothing. Liberated youth, with great empty boxes of freedom, are plagued by uncertainty. Students are drowning in freedom and looking for direction. Possibility is another big box of nothing, full of cliches. Without authority or source of wisdom, one cannot know what your life is for. Authenticity is another empty box, again filled with cliches. College graduates haven't yet formed identities, so self-referential morality is useless. Autonomy is the emptiest box of all, and the concept of personal truth is a farce. We dump the sands of uncertainty on graduates floundering in formless deserts. A Danish theologian claimed ideas one's willing to die for are more important than facts. At least a student's life is structured. Kanye-like condescension pervades the least structured young adulthood in history. Autonomous interactions and values have replaced centuries of generational conformity. This relates to economic sexual malaise of youth as well as their addictions and stability. Alienation, hardship, and failing mental health make optimism a demented standard. Others opt for the daring adventures of experience before real life settles in at 35. Extreme activities, international travel, widen risk horizons, building identity capital. Although an excellent beginning to your 20s, this can become an aesthetic life. Bikram, Burning Man, swing dance, soul cycle, Krav Maga, all for the gram. Possibilities are experienced, but ideals are not lived, always hovering, never landing. Plagued by FOMO, serial adventures don't accumulate the flow of accomplishment. Random sampling from the grocery store of life paralyzes through self-consciousness. A life of commitment is 1,000 no's for those few precious yeses. Frenetically bored, we're saturated by decommitment devices in liquid modernity. Comparison robs joy in this dizzy freedom. A depressive suicidal said as much in his epic novel embodying terminal distraction. He advised to exercise awareness and control when deriving meaning from experience. But the courage required for self-awareness is too unrealistic. We all flee ourselves. Big questions are completely daunting and unanswerable in the face of tech addiction. The aesthetic life leads to a ditch of realization that freedom sucks. Personal, social, and emotional freedom should be bypassed. It absolutely sucks. Three, the insecure overachiever. Some follow a gold star winning life, borrowing the prestige of organizations. They suppress existential anxiety by becoming pragmatists, solving problems. Corporate culture, however, does not feed the soul, nor spare you the ditch. Utilitarian pragmatism turns your why into a how. People pleasing and mentor shopping, your soul suffers Marxist exploitation. Spiritual questions and deep books are dropped for professionalism. Emotionally avoidant and morally decoupled, the dark jungle inside is walled off. The self-confident morality of global meritocracy defines community as competition. Without your own competing moral system, the meritocracy swallows you with status. Ascendant young women experience ambition collision, delaying marriage, kids. These women fantasize about becoming mothers merely to drop out of the rat race. But this isn't just a female problem. Men too feel like they're underliving their lives. Acedia is a term for this quieting of passion. The phony nonchalance of the meritocracy encourages a lack of desire. Insecure overachievers with their foundations of quicksand keep building upwards, but they're never satisfied, their heart never fully engaged. Comparisons haunt their esteem, cheapening the selling of their soul. For the Valley. Tolstoy had adventures, love affairs, duels, and professional success on his first mountain. He abstained from vices, trying to treat others equally, and that sort of thing. He attempted intellectual and physical perfection, beginning with moral perfection. But then his brother died, and no theories could explain this death. Witnessing an execution in Paris, Tolstoy received absolute truth beyond reason. Judgment is based on innate autonomous morality, not social conformity. Tolstoy had lost faith in enlightenment, reason, progress, and public approval. He had no desires whose satisfaction were reasonable. Intellectualism seemed madness, as his mind turned suicidal, entering his valley. Accomplishment didn't save one of the greatest writers who ever lived from despair. Some never stumble, but most endure seasons of suffering. People suffer heartbreak, loss, failure, scandal, or are knocked sideways by health. Games of success can become empty, meaningless. Inner moments of clarity. During lengthy conference calls, shout, "Do what you love." Students descend into despondency, committing to curriculums to avoid uncertainty. This leads to dead-end careers, ruinous self-belief. The change process involves denial, recommitment, risky behavior, and acceptance. A telos crisis is a crisis of purpose. Nietzsche's why, which endures any how. The first kind is a walking crisis, living with the awareness you're settling. The second is the sleeping kind, paralyzed by self-focus and comparison. This cultural stomach-level sadness is caused by moral directionalist. This cultural stomach-level sadness is caused by moral directionlessness. Perfect social media hides confusion and anxiety facing life's big questions. Hyper-individualism addressed problems of the time but produced its own crisis. Individual emancipation left us disembedded, free of hierarchies and institutions. Social, emotional, physical distance has increased. Love, sex, decreased generationally. Decreasing religious political affiliations are symptoms of generational detachment. Deaths of despair, such as suicide, addiction, are caused by social isolation. Today's crisis of alienation stems from distrust and disgust in public institutions. Over 60 years, trust in government fell 75% to 25% because people are less trustworthy. The third is a crisis of meaning reflected by a rise in mental health problems. Since few young adults have purpose, most people cannot define their own morality. People should dedicate their lives to institutions and be proud to be American. Moral aloneness, not institutional corruption, is the problem. Yeah. Moral aloneness, not institutional corruption, that's a problem. We're morally alone. Don't pay attention to the corruption. The fourth crisis is tribalism, the self-cure of individualism taken too far. Loneliness and spiritual emptiness. Loneliness and spiritual emptiness breeds terrorism. People join the Islamic State for existential reasons, not material. War is caused by ancient instinctual tribalism, fed by unbearable doubt. The dark twin of community, tribalism, is distrustful narcissism based on hatred. People don't really care about political policies. They long for traditional institutions. Politics as moral identity creates tribal monsters. Personal or societal soul-crushing angst can become a precious season. The first mountain is our thoughtless chamber of value absorption. As the poets say, we'd rather die than face our illusions. Seasons of suffering blast us out of complacency. We can suffer our way to wisdom. Suffering smashes through the basement of your soul, and then further below. Suffering tenderizes the heart with sympathy and solidarity. Only spiritual food satisfies the deep hunger of suffering. Self-sufficiency is an illusion to be shattered through the transformation of suffering. 5. The wilderness. The normal reaction to suffering is escape, but suffering requires awareness. As the poets say, we should proceed from suffering to wisdom to service. Thousands of years of models illustrate this three-part journey. Take Moses, for example. According to rabbinic tradition, he chased a runaway lamb into the wilderness. Moses was his own hidden treasure and had come into himself. In moments of confusion, one should go into the wilderness. There are huge benefits by going off into the margins of different physical places. Attentive to your best intuitions, you go toward solitude without fear. Overachievers can only learn to love within the indifference of the wilderness. Nature moves at qualitative kairos time, allowing the soul to commune with itself. Intimacy with oneself reveals fear, pain, regret, and withdrawal. Suffering not transformed is transmitted. But again, let's not talk about my first marriage. Woo! One should listen to their life and discover their hidden heart. A sense of terminal failure becomes merely joining the human race. A person has to listen to themselves, not live the lives and abstractions of others. My friend Peter is a good listener because he asks an unnatural amount of questions. Nature teaches negative capability, withholding judgment to recognize complexity. Listening to life means assessing strengths, inspirations, and identifying compulsions. People are themselves in nature. Below psychology's terror is a monster substrate ocean matrix unified moral love field. I wrote this book to describe identity and love in heart and soul Hellenistic Christian terms. Science can't explain our universally fierce love for hymnal political prisoner war moms. Science can't explain our universally fierce love for hymnal political prisoner war moms. This is that second mountain I was talking about. Improving yourself is being a slave to your ego. The scientific method is vain, egotistical. There's no use trying to understand the experience of the inexperienced. Give up on your ideas, kid. 6. Heart and soul. It's hard to kill bamboo. The desiring heart is a person's inner bamboo. Man is defined by his desire, like an existential shark. Despite abuse of adults, institutions, and economic hardship, 9 out of 10 kids succeed. Despite abuse of adults, institutions, and economic hardship, 9 out of 10 kids succeed. Passion trumps reason with its superior wisdom. Desire, as backed up by pop culture. Ultimate desire is bonding with someone till you grow roots that turn 2 trees into 1. I don't have any ulterior motives by wanting to define egalitarianism in Christian terms. Unlike an animal, man has the joint burdens of morality and shame. Christian terms and judgments define dignity, freedom, and voluntary sexual intercourse. Moral sentiments like bravery and justice are embedded within human nature. Morality proves the desire to perfect one's soul. We take esteem from our good actions and justify our bad. The dichotomy of good and evil infects all of human consciousness. Christian morality explains history in good and evil terms. Your soul is out there somewhere far away, even if you don't believe in it. It will hunt you down like a leopard. The trouble in your soul makes his presence felt like a drawer full of knives. You don't deserve to be happy, even at your best moments. Even with your family, you are destined to be unmasked by the inescapable judgment of Christian morality. If you are lucky, you will frame suffering in quick Christian metaphors to proselytize others. Identity is formed through affliction, not attainment. You should kill your ego, but only after bullying your way into the world. Then one can leave the dusty broad highway to gain admittance into the afterlife. Through Christian metaphors of heart and soul, one is reborn into servitude. Earthquakes are required to defeat us into surrender by fortunate falls. Now is the time to reap the skill of being the bull and wisdom from suffering. It's like Dostoevsky's last second clemency. A near-death experience tends to make a person subservient, insane, or really happy. Wasting your time on trivialities is a sin against one's soul. But when you're born again in new form, you receive everlasting happiness. These Christian abstractions are more important than intelligence, ability, or praise. Love is learned by transitioning from shallowness to discontent to suffering to servitude.